I'm sure we're all familiar with the phrase, data is the new oil, and it's a very exciting proposition, the idea that every single one of us in our organizations could be sitting on data that will make our businesses wealthier and transform them and what they can bring to market. It's always worth remembering, however, that like oil, data needs careful management in order to avoid the kind of catastrophes that oil spillages cause. It was actually the UK mathematician Clive Humby, who is also the architect of the retailer Tesco's loyalty card, that first coined the phrase, data is like the new oil. But actually, it was the rest of the quotation that I think was more interesting. He went on to say, it's valuable, but if unrefined, it cannot really be used. It has to be changed into gas, plastic, chemicals to create a valuable entity that drives profitable activity. And this is really where the analytics technologies come into play to help us extract value from the data. So as Ned says, I'm Katie Ring, and I'm Research Director for IT Global Services within the Cloud Transformation practice, and this session is looking at managed analytics. So for the next 30 minutes, we'll be looking at the market opportunity, the types of services that are coming to market, and how managed service providers can position for the opportunity. So let's turn first to look at the market opportunity itself. I'm beginning perhaps by setting the context for a few minutes. So again, I think we'd probably all be agreed in this room that within business technology, it's consumer technology that is driving our changes within IT. The way that consumers can access services these days using mobile devices, anytime, any place, anywhere, it's changing the way that we access healthcare, banking services, travel, and so on. Beginning to change the way we also access our internal IT services, but that's lagging a little bit. But nevertheless, every time as a consumer we access these types of services, we are leaving behind digital footprints which help to create more and more of the data that's available to be used in different ways by companies. So for example, I'm sure today, many of you probably flew to Vegas, maybe yesterday or today, and while you were traveling, your airline probably pushed information to your cell phone to let you know about the flight, to inform you of any offers you might be eligible for at the airport, and so on. And increasingly, we take this kind of personalized service for granted. But as IT professionals, we also know the amount of work that goes into creating what we're considering now to be fairly mundane types of services. But as the customer experience shifts, this has a big impact, of course, on the types of technologies that we need to use. So in order to create more digital agile processes, we have access to what I would call maturing disruptive technologies, because if we think about the leading software as a service, pure play, Salesforce.com, that company was set up in 1999. That's not even this century. If we think about Amazon Web Services, as my colleague William Fellows mentioned this morning, they were launched in 2006, so that's a decade ago. So these technologies, the cloud technologies that underpin our ability to cater for increasing customer demands, are fairly robust now. They're capable of supporting core processes going forward and helping us create these personalized experiences. They also are very critical to help us be more competitive in the digital market. I think Michelle Bailey mentioned this morning that it's worth talking to people you consider to be competitors to see if there's a way of cooperating. And of course, the way that relationships are changing within the cloud ecosystem makes it really important to be able to change your view of competitors and to be able to deliver new services to market more effectively and faster. And so what we're looking to do is to create more intelligent systems of engagement, and many companies are looking to create more contextually driven action for their consumers. And again, if many of you were in the session that William Fellows ran, he gave a great example of the Royal Bank of Scotland identifying that a given carriage on a given train service each morning was actually the source of a number of financial transactions, which meant that the bank could think about form factors and targeting offers to those customers, given that they were travelling on a train. But behind all this is really the rise of a different form of analytics. And I'm now going to look at what these requirements are doing to change the shape of the market opportunity. So first of all, I'm going to use some data from our market monitor team who work with the supply side of the market predominantly to understand how their revenues are growing and changing. They've created a forecast for the total data as a service market, which covers database as a cloud, delivered from the cloud, analytics services delivered from the cloud, big data processing services, and so on. And they estimate that the market for these services was worth just over 2.8 billion last year. They expect this to be worth 4.6 billion this year. And with a compound annual growth rate of 46%, you can imagine how that market is going to build and grow. And we expect it to be worth a little over 19 billion by 2020. This is a huge opportunity here. If we turn to look at the buy side of the market with our Voice of the Enterprise team, they asked in a cloud survey, what was the most recently deployed new application at your organization using cloud delivery? And if you look at the combination of data analytics and business intelligence with big data applications, you can see that in combination, they come out at second at 16.1%. So it's a fair bet that many of your customers are already investing in this area now. So what does this mean in terms of the infrastructure choices that people are making for the workloads, the analytics and big data workloads? Well, today, you can see that around half of those workloads run on-premise, non-cloud infrastructure environments. But in 2 years, buyers tell us they expect that to reduce to around a third. And the types of deployment venues that grow are infrastructure as a service, the public cloud, and hosted private cloud, which gives you some idea of the potential opportunity that managed service providers will have as this application category grows on cloud infrastructure. So there are obvious opportunities around more traditional infrastructure services that a managed service provider can deliver, but it's worth considering what additional opportunities this changing market might provide for managed service providers. So earlier this year, I conducted some research into managed analytics as a service to see what different service providers were coming to market, how they were coming to market, and the types of services they were developing. And I'd now like to share those findings with you. So it's very clear that analytics requirements are changing within organizations. I think we're probably all familiar with the classic data warehouses, the business intelligence reporting tools, which were all developed to manage internal data using mature processes. And we tend to refer to this as being developing our systems of record in the back office using these very efficient, proven technologies. And although we talk a lot about some of the newer analytics technologies, these technologies are still very important, as are the processes that they enable. But of course, given the context of this event, talking about digital transformation, what we're really interested in, I think, are the customer-facing interactions and the changing requirements that brings to bear on analytics. the types of more dynamic, adaptive processes that need to be supported, and the different types of data that need to come in to models to enable us to support our businesses going forward. And these feed into the systems of engagement that many organizations talk about. And the technologies underpinning those new systems of engagement are changing very rapidly. But both the systems of engagement and the systems of record need to feed into and inform each other, which is why at 451, our data platforms and analytics team have developed a whole approach around total data integration and the requirement to develop an architecture to do that. But I think what's really underpinning the excitement around managed analytics as a service is the rise of advanced analytics. So I've already referenced business intelligence, which gives you a tool to look at what has happened. So for example, if you're a beachwear retailer, let's say, and you are fairly confident that you haven't sold what you expected to sell, and you can go and look at your data and see what has happened, and you see that you have not sold as many units of beachwear as you expected. Your next move would probably be to try and find out why that has happened, to move to explanatory analytics. And to do that, you may incorporate other data sources. So you may look at the weather reports for the past season in the regions where beachwear hasn't sold as well, and discover that, yes, the weather was abysmal, it rained, people didn't want to buy beachwear as you expected them to. But more and more today, organizations are wanting to understand not just what has happened, not just to make decisions based on rear view mirror driving. They want to understand what's going to happen in the future. They want predictive analytics to help them. So for example, you could bring together the data sets that you hold internally about buying patterns around beachwear that you have held as you've developed your business. You could add to that weather forecast data, changing demographic data, to create algorithms to predict what is likely to happen in the coming seasons that could affect your business. And then moving beyond that, customers want to know not just what might happen in the future, but also what they should do about it. It's all very well having a lot of information, but how does that information support my decisions as I grow my business? They want to know what's the best possible path to create scenarios so that if the data suggests that one type of pattern is happening, you can make a decision as to what type of plan you want to put in place, this kind of prescriptive analytics. And if you have access to real-time or near real-time data, which you may do if you've got electronic point-of-sale systems as a beachwear retailer, you can proactively and continuously improve your models to help your decision-making as you go along. So it's this type of advanced analytic capability that's really underpinning the managed analytics as a service that I've been looking at. So what is managed analytics as a service? Well, the first thing to say is this is a professional service capability. So I'm not talking about an analytics app that's run in a software as a service mode. I'm talking about an offering that requires professional people to create the offering. So having data scientists, having Hadoop engineers, having business analysts, and so on. So there's a people professional service element to it. And that team has to be able to integrate very diverse data sets in order to create the offerings that the client wants and deliver the results in a self-service way so that the client can access the results via their own dashboards that are customized for them, that they pay for on a subscription on-demand model. And as I've mentioned, underpinning all this is advanced analytics technologies, machine learning, real-time analytics, and so on. So what do managed analytics as a service providers need to do? Well, they need to be able to provide a uniform access point, working with the client to understand the client's workflows and business processes, bring together the diverse data sets to turn raw data into actionable information for the client. They need to be able to aggregate the user's separate data silos into a unified environment so that authorized users can access the data no matter where it resides, whether on-premise or in the cloud. They need to be able to support collaborative ways of working within the client organization by providing search and audit capabilities, classifying data, tagging data, finding ways to report data that make sense to the users that need to work with it. And ultimately, they need to connect the users with the right data for their needs so that you're turning an organization's data from a passive resource into a proactive resource for change going forward. So how do they do this? How do managed analytics as a service providers deliver these types of services? Well, they will all have a platform. But because we're talking about service providers, these tend not to be fixed commercial platforms. They tend to be architectural frameworks that have been developed to support technology stacks so that different components can be switched in and out, supporting data selection, data integration, data management, data modeling and analysis, and data presentation as insight. And really, one of the values of the managed analytics as a service provider is the ability to guarantee that these components will work together to deliver the types of solutions that the customer requires. Because within the Hadoop ecosystem, the pace of change is so rapid that it's really difficult to fix a data integration architecture for longer than a year. So this is part of the value the service provider is bringing to bear to the market. And there are four main types of managed analytics as a service offerings that these providers are coming to market with. And the first of these we would call apps. But they're not apps in the sense of an ISV providing a software as a service capability, because don't forget, this is a professional service offering, and so these apps will be customized for each client. The service provider will have developed generic analytic app templates and then code 20 to 30% of the solution for each customer. And the real value of this is that the service provider themselves has a much more efficient, effective consultancy group doing this, and the customer, of course, gets a much faster solution. And the way this approach works is that the service provider will go into the client and decide on the use cases with the client, decide which data sets will be used, go away and make the data models, map those back to the data sets, and then start creating the app for the client delivered via personal dashboards. Another type of managed analytics as a service offering is what we're calling lab on demand. It's a kind of virtual lab environment where a client will pay for a set of technology components and a certain skill set to use those technologies, maybe for a 3-month or a 6-month period, paying for it on a subscription basis. Now, clearly, this is the sort of service that's going to appeal to large enterprises rather than mid-market or smaller customers, and it's proving very popular in the financial service sector at the moment. The third type of offering is what service providers are calling insight as a service. And when I first heard this phrase, I thought it sounded rather pompous, but I think actually what is trying to be conveyed here is that with this model, the customer really just gets the answer to questions rather than owning any of the algorithms or models. All you own is the answer. And this is set up in a similar way to the apps model, except that the customer will access their dashboard to get the answers. And it's usually a subscription model, and they can either have continuous access to their dashboard as the model runs, or they can get regular updates from the service provider on a daily, monthly, quarterly basis as required. And the interesting thing about this type of service is although it seems quite a simple and effective way to make use of analytics as a customer, just give me the answer. I don't want to know how the technology works, just give me the answer. In fact, there is a complication here because in order to make use of continuous insight, you need to be able to integrate with some of the customer's internal workflows and business processes. And so consequently, the credibility of a service provider around managed security is really important here. And then finally, there's the monetize the data option. So all the types of offerings I've been talking about so far have really been looking at how to use analytics to develop new products, services, and so on. When we talk about monetizing the data in this context, we're talking about the data that is a byproduct of the business that is running. So for example, if a service provider has a group of customers that work in the healthcare sector and also has a group of customers that work in the pharmaceutical sector, it's possible, by setting up a data marketplace, that the service provider could take anonymized data sets from the healthcare providers and sell them to the pharmaceutical companies. There is a big caveat here, however, because this is a risk-reward decision. And clearly, if you're a healthcare provider, the risk is that you've got to be really confident that the service provider is properly anonymizing the data and that you're not going to lose your reputation in terms of breaching data protection, data governance, and regulation. You have to measure that against possible revenue rewards, and I think that's not proven yet. So this is really a very nascent model, but I am aware of a couple of service providers that are trying to get it working at the moment. So I've covered a lot of information so far, and now I'd like to think about how managed service providers can position for this opportunity. So the most obvious way to take advantage of the rise of advanced analytics is to offer IT infrastructure services, which will be core to your business, as well as data storage services. These are things that you already have in place that you can offer to the market. Moving beyond that, you could think about providing infrastructure platforms for analytics, for Hadoop distributions, for example, that can help the customer make use of big data processing services. So, for example, at a base level, you could offer Hadoop on infrastructure as a service to clients, holding their hand as they make use of Hadoop distributions. You could go a little bit further and help them select the appropriate cloud deployment venues as they develop their big data processing capabilities. You could go even further and be in a position to configure and manage Hadoop for customers, as well as adopting the financial risk of over and underutilization of the infrastructure. And that is something that you can sell to your more traditional market in the IT teams within organizations. But using the same skills, you could also think about targeting slightly different customer segments, possibly marketing teams within your customer sets, or indeed working with small boutique professional services companies or ISVs that are looking to move to cloud platforms. Beyond that, you could consider becoming an analytics solution provider in your own right. Now, clearly that takes a lot of strategic thinking, because in order to do that, you either have to make quite a large organic investment in the right skills to do so, or you could consider partnering with local professional service organizations that offer analytics services. It may be that you have one or two key customers that have already talked to you about this kind of capability and may even have lined up a consultancy that they feel comfortable working with that would be useful for you to partner with. So there's that ad hoc way to develop this kind of service. Alternatively, you could consider developing a more standardized platform play for a particular customer sector within the mid-market. And then finally, don't overlook your ability to be a business insight partner in your own right, because talking about monetization of data, you as an organization will be developing data as a byproduct of your core business. And it is possible that the data that you hold could provide valuable insight to your customer base. So, for example, you may be able to help customers of a certain size using a certain type of hybrid cloud infrastructure understand whether they are managing that well within their peer group, whether they're getting good value for money, and so on. Or alternatively, you may have a vertical customer set where, again, you could offer similar types of benchmarking capabilities with the data that you hold. So, in conclusion, advanced analytics, I don't think, is an enterprise do-it-yourself capability. I know a lot of organizations have a go at Hadoop, but I think in order to really get the value from it, they need external help and support. They're looking for trusted third parties to work with, and you could be one of those trusted third parties. And the reason you might consider this is because managed analytics as a service is a very sticky type of service capability. Once you're embedded, offering continuous insight that is integrated with internal workflows and business processes, it's not likely that your customer is going to churn unless you're doing something very bad. So I began this presentation by talking about data being the new oil. And what I'd like you to leave thinking about is the fact that as managed service providers, there are various opportunities. So when big data and advanced analytics come up, don't just think data storage as your opportunity. Think oil refinery. Think analytics. Think of the value that you could create for your customers and for yourself. Joining me on stage is Ankur Pawa, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who is the Managing Director and Global Leader for Advanced Analytics and Digital Commerce at Dell Services. He's worked across different industries and functions, so he's going to be really valuable, I think, on the panel. Ankur, could you tell us a little bit about your interest in and experience of advanced analytics so that the audience knows your perspective?
Well, absolutely. So thanks, Katie, for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be here. Very excited about the discussion with the fellow panelists. So as Katie mentioned, I have the responsibility of globally running the advanced analytics and digital commerce business for Dell Services, and as Katie explained, we are an analytics solution provider. So we provide professional services to our customers across different industries: healthcare, banking, financial services, insurance, and retail, and pretty broad-based from an industry coverage. So my interest in analytics has been for a long time. When I was doing my MBA, I studied analytics, took 4 different electives, which really got me interested. Was with the management consulting industry for some time, where I leveraged a lot of that to help customers strategize, to help draw up revenue generation plans, growth strategy, cost optimization strategy, and so on and so forth. Then I spent some time with the private equity and venture capital industry, and those were the 2007 to 10 time frame when analytics was really taking up, was at the early stages of adoption. It was still a new animal. So very exciting times, saw a bunch of very interesting companies, which is what got me excited. And then I just thought it was more exciting to be on the other side of the table rather than investing in an analytics company. I should try and find a career there, and that's when I joined Dell Services, and ever since I've been heading the business, and it's been an absolutely amazing ride. We've seen tremendous adoption of analytics over the last 5-6 years. We are seeing new data sources evolving, coming up every year. Social was big, then we got IoT, we've got wearables, we've got all kinds of interesting data that is now getting pulled into large analytic systems, which is making prediction more and more accurate, which is what all of us do as data scientists. It's one thing to ingest all data, but you've got to have a lot of math, some very intense math going into that to ensure what are you predicting keeps getting more and more accurate. And with the advent of new forms of data, that's what's helping us. So I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to come. Cloud is helping us scale. I call it the Jenny of the analytics professionals. It fulfills a lot of our dreams and wishes that we couldn't achieve 3-4 years back is something that we do now. So very excited about the whole space, and as I said, thanks for having me here today.
Okay, thank you, Ankur. I'm also joined by Joe Reele, who is Vice President Datacenter Solution Architects at Schneider Electric, responsible for bringing together the full suite of Schneider Electric products and services for customers. So Joe, would you like to tell us your experience of and interest in analytics?
Sure. So once again, Katie, thank you for having me. It's great. I'm very happy to be here. I actually ran a large financial portfolio for a decade. And the interest in analytics and data is incredibly powerful. We find ourselves oftentimes making decisions because we did so 3 years ago and we had some success with that, and so on and so forth. And so my interest and drive towards this managed analytics as a service has been very, very rewarding. I think making better business decisions nowadays. I think my interest in this field, I think as we just heard, is going to get bigger. It's going to get better. It's going to get more, I think, accurate. In past, I think we all thought that we were making good decisions with some of the data that we had, but I think oftentimes we found down the road that we didn't have a complete data set, and or it wasn't analyzed correctly. I really like Katie's discussion there about professional services that really have to be part of that analytics. It's one thing to be a giant enterprise and have 1 million data points. The question is, who on your staff has the ability to analyze that and bring to you business solutions? And the answer is there's not very many people, if any, in the organization that actually are able to do that. So this new opportunity for service providers, I think, is very real. Honestly, I'm coming from an end user. This would have been something that would have been incredibly valuable then, and I think it's going to be incredibly more powerful as it matures and gets better and better. So it's like anything, though. I think you need the third-party people. I think what's interesting about this data is, and sometimes as an enterprise, I need to find an answer. But once I find that answer, I don't need that again. So all of the infrastructure, all of the science, all of that stuff that I needed to have, I needed for 3 or 4 months. Okay? So our business is investing in all that money and dollars and capital for professional people for a 3 or 4 months answer. The answer is no, they're not, but they think that they found the answer because they cobbled it together. So this is going to be incredibly powerful if it's done right, and we have the systems that can dial up and dial down as needed without killing them, like this guy here. So that's how I would say that.
Okay.
Thank you, Katie.
And finally, Paul Turner is responsible for marketing, product planning, and strategy at Cloudian. Storage industry expert, Turner previously led the product strategy office at NetApp, where he guided their investments into FlashRay, IronGrid, and CacheIQ. Paul, can you give us some flavor of your background and experience in this area?
Sure, Katie, and thank you, and actually glad to be in front of a group like this. I think these panels are always really useful. You know, what's Cloudian? We're providing petabytes and petabytes of scalable storage. We're an object storage vendor. We can build out highly scalable backbone arrays that can actually be interfaced just like, you know, Amazon services. They look like an S3 endpoint in a service. But why am I on this panel? All of our customers are now saying, you know, you've just given me a container. You've given me those, you know, that oil containers that you have up there. Let me do something with the data. And that's the biggest thing that's really driving us right now, is how can we bring more analytics into the storage platform itself? Because the interesting thing is I like to say that data has gravity. Data, you cannot move it around very easily. And once it gets to, yeah, you can move your 10 terabyte stuff around fairly easily, but when you get to petabytes of data, I cannot go and shift that over pipes and networks and get it to another place for doing analytics. What you actually have to do is bring the analytics into the platform, ingest it in, and that means that what you're seeing, I think, and where we think the data storage market is going, at least in the content storage, is you're going to see this convergence of storage and analytics into one platform. And then with that platform, you're going to see people, service providers, and managed analytics as a service. You're going to see people able to actually deliver new valuable services out to their customer. They can store the data, they can analyze it, you can provide premium services to your customers. So that's really why we're here. It's a pretty interesting time in the market. Storage has gone through a really dramatic change, probably more so than any other part of IT. But this convergence of storage and analytics, I think, is the future, and it's really interesting.
I'd like to explore a bit further with you, Joe, because you have the customer perspective, I guess, from the service provider opportunity angle. You've already explained that you see this as a big service provider opportunity rather than something that would necessarily be done internally.
Yes.
Is that because you've tried, or the organisation has tried to do it internally?
Yes.
Or okay. Would you like?
Yeah.
Would you like to give some
Yes.
flavour to that then?
Sure. So I think how I would say it was a very, very large financial institution, and we thought we had all the answers all the time, and so we did a lot of things internally. And we built our own DCIM system as an example. We built our own power management system as an example. Now, as it comes down to it, was it the best spend of time and money with our people? The answer was no. And did it provide the value and the benefit that we thought it was going to? And the answer was no. And so there are a lot of enterprises that have a lot of very, very intelligent people, but do they have the proper skill sets as you outlined in order to do this effectively? And the answer is no, that we didn't, and they don't now. And so I think there's two things that I think is really important for service providers to understand when dealing with an end user client. I think Katie did a great job of explaining you have to be trusted and reliable with what you're coming to the table with. There's a lot of people that say, oh, I can do that, I can do this, I can do the other thing. I think one of our ex-presidents said, in God we trust, everybody else bring the data. Okay, that's what needs, I think it's really important if a service provider can get their ducks in a row, be able to provide the insights and the valuable pieces of data that are going to help the enterprise move forward, which today, it's ad hoc at best. It really is. I think one of the things that I think is very compelling if you're a service provider out here, I think you should think about it very seriously on how to be able to provide, even if you're a wholesale guy. There's a lot of data that you have that may not be something you give to your clients and the tenants on a day-to-day basis, but you probably could and should. And you probably could and should, because it's going to become, as we say, more sticky. The more that you're able to embed, and the more that you're able to provide value back, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to lose that business going forward. So if I'm sitting in the audience here and I am a data center service provider, and I have some, quote, managed services that I am offering, if one of the things that you guys may consider going forward is try to figure out how to maybe partner with Cloudian or Dell services, right? To give your clients the value that they're I get passionate about this. They're dying for it. I can't tell how many times we're in a co-location data center and we would like this, that, and the other thing, and it's just not available, or it's not readily coming back to us. So I think it's a great opportunity to increase your presence and value and stickiness with your clients. I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And think beyond. I would challenge you guys and say, think beyond your day-to-day scope. If you're a powered shell person, maybe think about other things that are adjacencies to that, okay? Because I think If you don't do that, I think you're taking 2 steps backwards because you're standing still and the industry is passing you by. And so from an enterprise, if you prove the value and you're able to provide it at a cost-effective manner where you can dial up and dial down, a lot of times the customer only needs one answer one time. If you're able to do that, dial it back down, and then now that customer's coming back to you time and time and time again. I think you might be able to comment on that a little, yes?
Yep, absolutely.
So that's, I think, this is an exciting time in the market for service providers, because how many times has something new come up that you're involved with a little bit, but you can really go in and dive in. You know, it's before when you weren't in the data center industry and said, I want to be in a data center industry, you built a data center.
So, Ankur, I mean, Joe's been quite candid that back in the midst of time, they had a run at things and then realized that actually they needed external help. As a service provider that's developed these types of analytics services, are there any things that you can reference as learning experiences along the way that you might have done differently if you were starting out now?
So interestingly, about 3 years back, so we started the business about 4 or 5 years back, the advanced analytics part of it. The BI has been there for 2 decades, right? So, but about 3.5 years back, I was making a presentation to a customer, and after the presentation, the customer walked up and said, I like talking to you because in your entire presentation, you did not talk technology. There was no slide on what tool to use. How would you create the infrastructure? You just talked about my business, which was essentially about, in a certain market, for a certain category of products, they were seeing a huge amount of customer churn. So all that we talked about was what data are we going to look at? What algorithm are we going to write? How is it going to help them reduce churn? I think that was a big learning for us, that the kind of people who we're talking to when we sell analytics, or when we, who are eventually getting the dollars out of the kitty, are the CMOs, the lab owners, the COOs, the VP of revenue or VP of sales, and they talk technology in the 3rd or the 4th conversation, not in the first. Eventually, you've got to get there, because the how part of it is very important. But fundamentally, first you've got to figure out what business problem are you solving, how are you going to solve it, what's your approach to it, is there a problem or not? So sometimes in our conversations, customers would come to us and say, listen, I have all this data, what do I do with it? Now, that's a very real problem, but if you got to really attack it, you got to first figure out what business problems do you have, what data do you need to solve those problems, and then go from there, rather than just saying, hey, I've got this, now what do I do about it? And I think that's the biggest learning. So whenever we're talking to our customers today, we do not talk technology, at least in the first 2 or 3 conversations. It's always about what problem do you have. It could be about reducing your patient readmission, it could be about reducing fraud, reducing application fraud, it could be about reducing customer churn, it could be about improving customer acquisition. It's all about that. It's never ever technology. It gets there in round 3, round 4, and I think that's been the biggest learning for us. That's helped us build our team in the right way. That's helped us have the right kind of conversations with our customers. And we've been kind of evolving on that theme ever since. So now, even if you look at our team configuration, we are organized by businesses. We've got banking analytics, which runs as a separate business, healthcare analytics that runs as a separate business. We are not organized by SaaS or Revolutionary or whatever else, which is what a traditional service provider would do. They'd organize themselves by technology stacks. We don't even look at it as a capability engine. Does it make sense?
It does make sense. But Paul, I think you probably have a slightly different perspective on this. To what extent, given your interest in the marriage of storage and analytics, would you talk about that as a business solution primarily, or would your clients be more looking to you to convince them that the technology works first? What's your?
It's very much a business solution. I mean,
right.
Where our customers have come from, as they've gone, and big service providers like Schubert Phyllis over in Holland, They've implemented a big scalable infrastructure. They're actually doing it for a genomics client. But what that customer is looking for is not just can they store the data, they actually want to provide some extended analytics on top. So what they actually have from our platform, they've got the ability to do elastic search on all of the metadata, so they're actually able to get very quickly analytics or views of the data that they particularly want around the consumer records and the customer records, or what's being done in terms of different slices of the data that's interesting to them. But all of those are not translated back in the way I speak, technology kind of talk. They're translated back to the customer in terms of, here, I'm going to help you with your management of your health records and your genomics database. And so they've built a whole set of basically analytic services on top of what they had as a base platform, which, let's face it, storage is meant to be low cost and cheap, right? I mean, storage is getting there's not as much margin in just storing data anymore. Where there's margin for everybody in this business is how do you extend it, how do you provide added value? And so that's what we see our customers doing. And I do want to touch back on, where is this happening? You do have to follow the data. So it's not a fact of it's all going to end up in the cloud or it's all going to end up in enterprises. It's wherever the data is, because it's sticky and it doesn't move around very easily, then there's an opportunity for extended and managed analytics on top. Now, whether you want to provide that as a remote offering where you're providing managed analytics to a customer in their data center, or you want to provide it where you're the whole cradle and grave and you provide the analytics too, I think you've got to follow where the data is and then see how you can extend that with extended services. And that's what we see customers doing. We have another customer in actually California, and they're doing an IoT use case. And IoT is an enormous opportunity for this convergence of data and analytics. The reason for pulling back that data is so that you can analyze it. It's the only reason for it.
I know a lot of people in the audience will be interested in the application of analytics to IT automation and some of the technologies like machine learning that are coming to bear in that area. Do any of you have a view on things to look out for, technology areas that have a lot of promise in that area?
So I think, I was just at an oil and gas conference, an IoT conference actually last week in oil and gas, and they've always been kind of way ahead in IoT because they've been doing it forever, right? And they've been collecting and analyzing data, and what I think is really interesting is they've also been the leading in terms of automating and industrial automation, just across everywhere in the life cycle, the upside or the downside of how they look at the oil industry, the extraction side or the delivery side. So I think what you are seeing is industries like that. It is industry specific. They are using the analytics to actually automatically tune and fine tune their automations, or fine tune their wellheads so that they can extract in a more optimal way. There's crop automation. I'm not sure if you guys are even read up on this stuff, but even at the crop automation level, they actually automatically are testing devices to see the level of water in the soil, and they're varying the depth that they plant seeds at in these smart planters. I mean, we're seeing data analytics getting embedded into everything that we do, and that means it should be embedded into everywhere that we have data.
Is there anybody that wants to ask a question in the audience? You, sir.
One of the questions I had was along the lines for Dell services primarily. Many of the models you talked about required people and expertise, which for MSPs and cloud service providers doesn't have a lot of leverage in that model. So partnering is a good idea. Can I hear from Ankur and maybe the others about how they partner with service providers to provide those things that a mid-sized cloud service provider, managed service provider can't afford to invest in, but it's key to getting ultimately the infrastructure business, which is what they're looking for?
Sure. Within Dell services, just to kind of do some level setting. So I represent the business which does professional services on analytics. So I've got a team of data scientists and so on and so forth. Now we partner with our infrastructure team to kind of make the infrastructure available and flexible. And the way we team up, as I was explaining, was that the first, second, third conversation is kind of primarily driven by us, where we're talking to the the business guys, right? The marketing folks or the lab owners or the COOs, et cetera, et cetera. And then when it comes to the how part, when we get together as a team with the IT, the business, and everyone sitting together and saying, hey, now we've whiteboarded stuff, we've got the art of the possible, now let's figure out how do you do it, and let's the devil lies in the details, can we furnish it or not? That's when we get together with our infrastructure team. So that's how we kind of tied at the hip, right? So we've got several solutions that are kind of on a cloud infrastructure. If it makes sense, we take them to the customers. Sometimes the need is, to Joe's point, you got to tune up and tune down. That's a very tricky thing to manage. Sometimes, very interestingly, like Paul was talking about IoT, the interesting thing about IoT is that 50% of your data is dirty. No matter where you go, and that hurts because you know that 50% of your storage cost is dirty. It's not even of any use to you. So that hurts, right? You got to clean it. And then the other interesting part is that if you collect data from sensors, no single sensor is going to give you data that's going to be meaningful. You got to correlate data from 4 different sensors to make out, sense from that. So those are the interesting discussions, that our infrastructure team has, and they're like, you guys are, what do you want? You can't have the moon. But then over the last 2 years, we've evolved significantly, and I think cloud has played a huge role. Wherever we're talking about public cloud, the conversations are a lot easier because your ability to tune up and tune down is significantly easier. Whenever you're having conversations with a healthcare customer, the conversation is a lot more difficult. I wish we can solve the problem. Flexibility, agility still remains a challenge. Like Katie said, we're going to see the public cloud pie expand. I'm kind of rooting for it from the sidelines that it does. But we still face that challenge. We've done a lot of good work with the commercial industries, oil and gas, where sensor data can be put on public cloud and you can have that tune up and tune down. Some of the industries, it still remains a challenge, and because of that, we can do only so much there. But that's the model, and I don't think we've gotten to a point where we can say we can do anything under the sun today. There are still a lot of constraints once you start, drilling into details, managing regulations, managing compliance, especially as it relates to healthcare and banking. But we're getting there. I think it's getting better. Does it answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, I think I would add to it though that there's a lot of standard open source efforts in this space that really do help you, because then there's a set of developers and there's an ecosystem around it, right? So, Hadoop we talked about, you talked about earlier. You also have the Apache Spark, which is really for real-time analytics and can also run on top of a base platform, which is like a Hadoop-based platform with Spark extensions on it. You've got Elasticsearch, which is the ability to index data in a very easy way. By just opening up that as infrastructure to your customers, Amazon doesn't provide managed analytics as a service. Amazon provides Elastic MapReduce, and customers go and bring their data scientists to it. And so I think there is quite a big opening. And customers want to have this DevOps style model where they understand their data and they want to do some of their analysis. So I think it's going to be a range of give me the infrastructure and let me go have at it, or full Dell services where I'm going to provide the entire, the answer to you. And it is going to be that range. And I think you touched on that earlier, Katie.
Are there any other questions from the audience at this stage? Well, in which case, the time has actually flown by. Maybe we could finish off by you giving your predictions as to what you think the impact of advanced analytics will be on the managed service provider market in 5 years' time. So, who'd like to go first?
No.
Paul, I think you've been picked.
Got elected.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. Like I mentioned on storage, I don't think people will be talking about storage anymore. They're going to be talking about, content. They're going to be talking about data. They're going to be talking about business value of being able to move data around and provide, video on demand services out to customers. They're going to provide vertical solutions so that I can do, automation of the oil well analysis that we were talking about earlier. It's going to be a data-led economy, and that means not a storage-led economy. It's not about bits and bytes and storing stuff. It's going to be all of these business value pieces that we add to it. So I think we'll be looking at things very differently. And then I think we get into the really interesting bit, which is how can we get the data services to communicate with each other? How can we actually talk about different sources of expertise in analytics and how they can feed each other and become smarter businesses? So I think you will be dealing a lot with the interoperability between data services.
Joe, what's your view? You can speak from the customer perspective.
Well, here's what I would think. I'm a bit of, for those of you that know me, I'm a bit of a Star Warsy guy anyway, so I kind of think way out sometimes. I actually believe that within the 5 to 7 years, I think we're going to have a significant improvement in predictive analysis, which is going to lead our business a lot more than we're doing today. Right now, I mean, we saw Katie, have that up there, that predictive analysis, but nobody's really good at that right now. Check out the weather guy. So I really think that predictive analysis is going to be extremely mature, more so than we think of it today. And I think that's going to drive our businesses more. The predictions coming out of a piece of software than somebody saying, I think we should do this in the boardroom.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Ankur.
So Joe kind of, read my mind. I kind of extend that thought a bit, right? Science is going to replace intuition in businesses. That's going to happen. And intuition is going to be replaced not just at a CXO level, but at the ground level. So the drivers who work for UPS today use analytics to do their jobs. Right from figuring out where do they take a parcel and put it where in the truck, to figuring out what route should they take in a day, which is very difficult, by the way, to explain to a driver because they've been doing it for 30 years, is being run on analytics. Tomorrow when a patient gets admitted to a hospital and when it's being checked in, you'll get a risk score saying that, hey, the likelihood of the patient getting readmitted is 0.8, which is very high, and this is what you've got to do to bring it down from 0.8 to 0.6. So this is democratization of predictive analytics. It's going to seep in deep down into the business. It's no longer going to be consumed at the CXO level in an ivory tower where you get fancy PowerPoints. Businesses are going to run on predictive analytics, and they're already being run. And because of all the fantastic enablement that's happening from a technology perspective, whether it's the cloud enabling it, whether it's the open source revolution around Hadoop and R and all that, it's just going to help that transition from analytics being a fancy little thing that only 20 people in a 1,000 people organization used to do, to being consumed at the ground level, and you're going to see businesses run on top of analytics, which is already happening, and it's going to happen in a big, big way. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's been a really good panel. Perhaps you'd join me in thanking our panelists.